This is Judaism Unbound, episode 421, Radically Jewish Time. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rosenberg.
And today we're excited to feature two guests who have written a new book, Ariana Katz and Jessica Rosenberg, who are the two authors of For Times Such as These, a radical's guide to the Jewish year. The book has a chapter for each month of the Hebrew calendar, and it offers spiritual practices and holiday rituals rooted in movements for racial justice, decolonization, feminism, and queer and trans liberation. Before we dive into this conversation, we actually have a really exciting landmark to announce today. Today marks 8 years of the Judaism Unbound podcast. We launched the podcast in March of 2016. I think we would have been thrilled if you told us that we would get to episode 42, let alone more than 420. By the way, we're not stopping, and we haven't missed a week, not a single week, since March of 2016. We certainly would never have been thinking back then that we would have reached 2.5 million downloads. But here we are, and it's thanks to every single one of you who've been out there along for the ride with us. Whether it's one episode that you've listened to today, this is your first episode, or 5 or hundreds, we thank all of you for your support. And we're hoping to mark this support, unsurprisingly, in a special way. For now, actually, we want to get a little bit of a sense of who's out there and who's excited. And so we were hoping that maybe one way to evaluate that would be to ask you to make a special donation in honor of our 8th year and donate an amount that ends with 8. So the easiest Jewish number there is 18. That would be great. But we'd ask you that if you would normally donate $100, donate 108, just so that we know that you're out there and that you're counting along with us. Go to judaismunbound.com/donate, and you can make a one-time donation that ends in an 8. Or you can sign up there to make a monthly donation. Thank you so much for your support of Judaism Unbound just by being there and listening, and also for your financial support, which really isn't about going to us. It's about making it possible for us to keep this all going and to do more and more, as we have been doing with things like the Young Yeshiva and various other projects. So your support of us keeps this podcast going, and it also makes it possible for us to reach out in all kinds of ways to so many other people who may not yet have found the podcast. So thank you so much for being part of these last 8 years, and we look forward to being together with you for the next 8 years. And so now let's turn to today's episode. Here's a little bit of biographical information about our two guests. Ariana Katz is a returning guest to Judaism Unbound. She is the founding rabbi of Hinenu, the Baltimore Justice Shtibel, an intentional spiritual community that we featured back in episode 361. Ariana Katz is a fellow podcaster. She was the creator and host of Kaddish, a podcast about death and identity, and she will be the co-host of a forthcoming podcast called God Crush. Ariana Katz has rabbinical ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and she serves on the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council. Our second guest, Jessica Rosenberg, is an organizer with Matir Asurim, Jewish Care Network for Incarcerated People, and is also part of the Jewish Voice for Peace Rabbinical Council. Jessica Rosenberg is a writer and teacher on integrating trauma-informed pedagogy into Jewish education, ritual, and organizing, and she authored an introduction to a book called Trauma, Healing, and Resilience for Rabbis, Jewish Educators, and Organizers. Ariana Katz and Jessica Rosenberg are part of the team behind the Radical Jewish Calendar Project, which was founded 7 years ago and which layers dates from the Jewish and Gregorian calendars, astrological happenings, and holidays with 12 months of political art, culture, and history made by dreamers, artists, and organizers who want to know what time it is. Ariana Katz, welcome back to Judaism Unbound, and Jessica Rosenberg, welcome for the first time. It's so great to have you both.
So great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Oh, hello.
So there are a lot of books out there about the Jewish holidays, about the Torah portions, about the Jewish year. In fact, I aspire to write one myself. So I ask this question not with criticism, but just with interest. Who do you imagine this book is for? And how do you imagine that person experiencing the Jewish year differently, having read this book, than had this book not come into existence?
Well, I can't wait to read your book, and I'm glad it's coming out after ours so that you can respond to it, and so please write it soon. The audience for this book it's twofold. So we are thinking about are co-organizers on the Jewish left who are really steeped in the lefty organizing world, but are looking for tools from our Jewish inheritance to contextualize, to deepen their work. And then we're thinking about our Jewish community who's looking for the political resonances that Jess and I and so many find in our tradition. So trying to connect those two streams together. When we were first dreaming up this book, I was calling it The Jewish Joy of Cooking because my mother's copy of The Joy of Cooking, which has like a Moon and Stars book sock on it, is just like a mess. It's just covered in food stains and it's dog-eared. And she writes notes about what recipes didn't work in the columns. And my hope is that this is a book that is used, that you don't just sit down and read it in full once, but that it offers inspiration that can be played with from year to year.
Can you describe, and maybe this comes from your own experience, and maybe this comes from the experience of other people that you talk to, that you lead in your own communities. Like, I'm imagining that the issue here is that, you know, I'm a leftist Jew, and now I'm interested in celebrating Purim, and I pull off the various books off the shelf, and I kind of look at them, and I say, like, this doesn't connect to the way that I'm hoping to celebrate, or the thing that I'm trying to get out of it. And I'm wondering if you can give some color to that, if you can give some examples of what are holidays or other Jewish observances that, in your experience, somebody who doesn't have this book is kind of at sea and doesn't really know how to do Judaism the way they want to do Judaism, but with this book, they would have some new ideas.
When we were, over the years of writing this, talking to our organizing community about what do you want in a year cycle and holiday book, the first thing that most people said was, we actually want to know the roots. We want to know Torah. We want to know tradition. We want to know where it comes from. We've been to radical seders every year. We know how to like why to put an olive on the seder plate, but we don't necessarily know actually what was on the seder plate before we started putting oranges and olives on it. And so the first thing that you'll find in the book is the roots of every holiday and origins and text. There is a lot of Torah and rabbinic texts, Mishnah and Gemara in it, and try to like lay that foundation. The source text for many of our holidays, there is misogyny, there is Jewish supremacy, there is homophobia, and like part of what we hope to offer with this is like a way into the tradition where those places of harm are going to be like not just brushed over, but named with care, and then like offered invitations into like how to work with them in different ways, and also how our feminist and queer and organizer ancestors of different generations have worked with them already. So that's the first thing that you're going to find is actually just like a very traditional, here's the Torah text where this holiday comes from, and then we layer on top of it.
I think that it's really important to name that this is a book about Judaism written by people who are committed to the flourishing of the Jewish left, but that so much of this book is not about explicitly XYZ movement. I guess what I'm saying is it's not like kosher style. It's not Judaism flavored organizing strategy, which, like, God bless. We wanted to write a book that was going to be rooted in our own practice and in the practices of people that we are in community with, and have our value systems interwoven into it, which is why books like Standing Again at Sinai, Judith Plaskow's seed that sprouted so many teachers and students from it, was important, because it's not an idea, it's a life that's being captured in a book. And I think that's my hope for what this book can be. The book's divided into 3 sections. The first section is that grounding in what's happening right now as we see it on the Jewish left. What's the ecosystem? How do we talk about theology? What are understandings of love of God, love of the Jewish people? What's our understanding of Judaism beyond Zionism? How do we have disability justice embedded in every way that we make practice and engage with text? And then the second section is a chapter for each month, the character of the month and the season that we are in, the way the Torah portions relate to the month, holidays, observances, and then particular issues that come up in practice and observance. And then the last section is a summary of every single Torah portion and a short summary with an analysis about our value set and our politics and what a political analysis of the Parsha would be.
We have the traditional roots of our holidays and then get into hot issues of our time and like what our holidays have to offer. I think like writing about Purim was a really beautiful challenge because we both have the glory of queer Purim spiels to revel in and talk about like where, kind of the contemporary history of radical Purim spiels. And then we also really wanted to confront the legacy of Jewish supremacy in Purim and its contemporary manifestations. So writing about, in 1994, Baruch Goldstein, an Israeli-American follower of Meir Kahane, who murdered 29 Palestinians and wounded 125 Palestinians in Hebron on Purim, specifically calling up the legacy of blotting out Amalek that is in the Purim story, the revenge murder that happens in the Purim story, and to know that that text is very much alive for people today and is causing extreme harm and violence. One of the things that we suggested, and this is also following Ariana's shul in Baltimore and a congregation we both love in Philly called Tzedek that has like experimented with when we are chanting Megillat Esther, the book of Esther on Purim, reading this text, one of the chapters that is specifically detailing Jews perpetrating violence, to sit on the floor when that's read and actually like chant that in the trope used to talk about destruction and death and violence on Tisha B'Av. Like, how do we actually embed into our Purim observances, working with the tradition in a way that acknowledges contemporary political landscape, and then to not just like do something different outside of our practice, but to actually shift how we observe these holidays, how we make them, because that's what our ancestors have been doing for millennia. Like all of Judaism has been shifting and changing in every generation. And this is like one example. And we know that there's 1,000 others out there and want there to be so many more.
I love hearing the two of you describe your book. I'm going to do a chutzpahdik thing, which is I experienced your book as having 4 sections.
Oh.
Shgoya, tell us.
I mean, from my perspective, this is not what you said. It's what I'm saying. I think it's one of the most ambitious books that we've ever featured on our podcast. I think that it is part of a rich lineage. You get this in some of your intro. It's funny. I was at synagogue schmoozing with some folks who identify as Jewish leftists. There was like a little book sale thing. And I was pointing them out, like, oh, there's this one over here, Seasons of Our Joy by Arthur Waskow. Really important classic text that unlocked the flow of the calendar year for a lot of people, especially folks who identify as progressive or as leftist. And then immediately after that, I went home and did a deep read of your first section of the book, where you cite that you're in a lineage that includes Seasons of Our Joy by Arthur Waskow and also many others. Jill Hammer, a past guest of ours, her work, and some others who have written sort of year cycle books, to use your language. I want people to have a sense of the stakes of this, and I know that it's like uncomfortable for the two of you to be like, we wrote a really important book that is in this lineage of important books. I happen to think it's true, and I want our listeners to read it. So I'm going to say that so you don't need to. The first section I experience as something I've been pining for without totally realizing it, which is kind of a synthesis of a bunch of different corners of, I'm going to say, the Jewish left. We could have a long conversation about what the Jewish left means and doesn't mean and what it is. But like, there's sections in this first part where we look at anti-racism, we look at disability justice, we look at queerness, we look at diasporism. We like integrate all of these flavors that I think operate in a lot of people as integrated, but so often when we're tackling them in Jewish spaces or in movement spaces, whatever, we're sort of tackling them one at a time. It's hard to fully integrate them. And so this first section, it's one of the first things I've read that feels like, oh, this is a synthesis of our 2020s Jewish left moment that feels really important, because I don't think people are noticing the ways in which, oh, there's stuff popping up in cities all around the country and people organizing small groups in this way. And like, I do think we're in the beginnings of something that could basically become what people think of just as Judaism in a little while. And it's happening in a lot of places that are currently seen as leftist, which that excites me. So that was section 1. Section 2, I don't have that much to say. Like, I agree. The section 2 is about the flow of the year.
Section
It's
2,
gorgeous.
skip it.
It's great, but like that's not where my 4th section spiciness comes in. Second section is on the flow of the year. Third section on the Torah portions. Both super great. I like really encourage folks to dive into those little distillations of each month and of each Torah portion, not little in the, but like bite-sized chunks of the book. Second was the flow of the year. Third was the Torah portion. To me, the 4th section is what comes after that. And you didn't cite this, but you have a brief closing, but I actually think the bibliography, maybe this is just, I'm a nerd. I spent a decent amount of time in your bibliography because I experience it as an incredible, again, like synthesis of recent approaches to Justice Judaism. And I find it very powerful. And I actually think that as much as the content of your book is really worth exploring, another use of your book could be as planting the seed to start to learn about these other teachers that you cite. I think this is a really ambitious and important book, and I want it to reach people in that sense. So with all the dangers of sort of creating a discomfort where I'm saying this book is ultra important to the people who wrote it, I'm curious, like, what are the stakes? This is not just like, oh, we wrote a book. Like, this is tackling a lot of really important issues, and I'm kind of curious to open that up.
Lex, thank you. I think that's the first thing. I think the stakes are really high. I don't know how to be a Jew right now if I'm not Jewish with leftists. And I don't know what the future of Judaism is, but I know it when I'm doing it. I don't know if there's a future for any denomination, but I hope that this gets to be a contribution to whatever we need to build now in the wreckage. It has been incredible to see the ways in which some people are holding on more tightly to their Judaism, despite the massacre that we are seeing being perpetrated. To see people doubling down to commit to their Judaism and their values that have them hold on to life and to the liberation of all people, because it could be so easy to walk away from. I know that the Jewish left makes it possible for me to get to keep investing in this project and in this framework that gives structure and meaning to my life. My hope is that this book could similarly, for like one person, be the lifeline that has been so extended to me. And I love that the bibliography is the 4th section. And also the index is really delicious to me because of the different vocab words that are defined next to each other, that I don't know if they have ever been on the same index.
The glossary.
In a book that I still don't know about book parts. I missed that lesson in 2nd grade.
For a sense of that, so people have a sense. There's like a page and it says BIJOCSM, acronym for Black, Indigenous, Jew of Color, Sephardi, and Mizrahi. And then the next word is Chag, which means holiday. And I feel like that's like taking language that we think of as, you know, activist anchored or justice Jewish anchored, taking a word like Chag, holiday, boom, they're right next to each other.
And like the same thing happens with the radical Jewish calendar when you have a mass strike somewhere and you say, oh, it's connected to this Parsha this year. Or when you see Patty Byrne, who co-founded Sins Invalid, when you see her birthday on the 21st of January, which this year is the 11th of Shvat, and you see how many days before Tu B'Shvat it is. So that is our inheritance. And I'm glad that it shows up and that we all get to learn from our teachers together.
I mean, also just keep referencing like the year that we're in 5784 and in what's happening in Palestine. I think that like my ambitions for this book has grown significantly. I used to be kind of worried like, oh God, someone's going to read it. I'm going to be perceived. That's intimidating. And now because this book, what we're trying to do is gather the feminist, queer, anti-racist, culturally diverse Judaism that we're a part of, and then like amplify it to the world. I'm like, no, I want everybody to read this. I really do. talk in the introduction about kind of trying to break apart the idea of like mainstream and margins and not self-marginalize and understand that like the center of Judaism is just based on how many people are doing it and who are claiming it. You know, we're trying to pay homage in the title to like radical political organizing, yes, and also like I want what's in here, like thriving Jewish communities that we're a part of, to be understood as like the new center.
A reminder, we started by hearing about how people wanted to get roots, right? They wanted to hear about that. That's the language you used. A reminder that the word radical, it is a mathematical term that refers to roots. It like a square root, a cube root, like that is a radical. It is taking something from its unrooted state and finding its root. So taking 16 and finding its 4, which is the square root. Like it makes sense that as radicals, you want to return to the root. I really want to carry forward what you just brought about the idea of sort of alternative versus mainstream, not self-marginalizing. I really want to sit in that because I think, honestly, it's something for us to reflect about as Judaism Unbound. I think we go back and forth on this. Sometimes we are in the mindset of really like new center, new Judaism. And I think subconsciously, even as we always hold that as our frame, we do fall into forms of talking where we presume that quote unquote mainstream institutions or legacy Jewish institutions sort of are the most central version of what Judaism is, and the rest of us are alt. And I don't want to do that. And I really appreciated you directly articulating that. The other piece I wanted to open up, you're both Reconstructionists. You're both Reconstructionist rabbis, and I do think it probably matters that you're both rabbis, but I'm really interested in the Reconstructionist piece, not so much like the movement apparatus of the Reconstructionist universe, but the fact that Reconstructionist ideology is premised on a few things that I think are really pivotal, namely that at any given point, we construct and reconstruct what Judaism is. And so that grants us a huge amount of power and, I would argue, responsibility. Basically, my two questions are, how do we orient to this notion of alternative and mainstream? You've given us a little, but what's a little more? And how can we hold that notion that we actually have the tools, the responsibility, the ability to construct what Judaism is, not just what the Jewish left is, but what Judaism is?
I think this is like the one thing I ever say is that we're not inventing anything new, that we are doing something that is so old, even in the recreation of it. Now that we're talking about this book a lot to other people, the question is like, what's your favorite Jewish holiday? And I think my actual favorite Jewish holiday is Pesach Sheni. But
this is the best thing I've ever heard. Ariana, I'm so excited for this. Pesach Sheni, give us the case that it's the best thing.
Here we go, my babies. Pesach Sheni exists because in the Torah, some death workers who were busy taking care of dead bodies on Pesach were rendered ritually unready to be able to bring the Passover sacrifice. And so they come to Moses and they say, "Nu, like, because we were doing this thing, we don't get to make a Pesach. We don't get to eat of the offering. We don't get to participate in this most central ritual. What gives?" And Moses brings it to God, and God's like, "You make a strong point." And so they institute Pesach Sheni, which happens 1 month after Pesach Rishon, after the first Pesach. Pesach Sheni means second Passover, and it's a mulligan. To our golf playing Jews, a mulligan is a repeat when you get to take these backsies and do it again. Pesach Sheni is saying, I was spiritually in a place that I could not engage in this festival when it happened, but I am still a person who cares about time, who still cares about observance, who wants to be connected to my community, knew I should suffer because of that. And so we have literally in our Torah the idea that you can invent a new holiday after the main holiday has been established. Yes, we're talking about not just honoring holidays and festivals from our Jewish tradition, but bringing in other ones, bringing in other anniversaries and lifting them up. But we also are the inheritors of a tradition that knows that you need to play with it and you need to expand it. And like, I'm a kid who like made zines and got stuck on her desk because she was wearing weird bondage pants from Hot Topic. And like, I know that I have the
Sure.
high school wound of not wanting to be a member of any club that would have me. And I think a part of the healing of that alt kid wound and also of the experience of being intentionally pushed out from, I know we're not saying it, mainstream Jewish community, is also saying I am the inheritor of a tradition that is as old as any other Jewish tradition, and keeping it alive is our responsibility.
Something that we talk about in the book is acknowledging the real material power that Jewish institutions wield and distinguishing that from the spiritual, cultural legitimacy of the Judaism we're practicing. So yes, we know that we numerically in dollars raised for our institutions, that our positions are not where the heft of Jewish institutional life is. And also we know that our politicians in the US don't represent most people and most people society, and so not letting that delegitimize our practice. So yeah, Reconstructionist Judaism. I'm not only a Reconstructionist rabbi, I'm also born and raised going to shul growing up at a congregation that was met in the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College building when I was a kid. It is deep in my Jewish DNA. Everybody knows that Judaism is always growing and changing. And what Reconstructionism offers us is some very intentional tools for how to be intentional about how we're changing Judaism. When I talk about my Reconstructionist thought and practice, it is all things that my mom said to me growing up. My parents were founding members of our Reconstructionist synagogue and very proud of it. And my mom would always say, the past has a vote, but not a veto, which is a Kaplan quote that no one can truly find the source of. But
Mordechai Kaplan for...
Oh, yes. Thank you. Mordechai Kaplan, the founding rabbi of Reconstructionism, but really also in my mind, it's Shelley Rosenberg, my mother, saying it. That says we get to engage, the past has a vote. We study the text, but it doesn't veto our contemporary values and what we care about. And also we change it through engaging with it. Part of what I was taught was that if you don't see a Jewish community that fits your needs or meets your values, then you get to / have to start one, and that it's going to take work. It's hard work. We don't have a top-down body that says this is what each synagogue or each person is doing or not doing. The invitation of Reconstructionist Judaism is for each congregation to study the text, think about contemporary values, and then make decisions on their own about what is meaningful and values aligned for each family and congregation. And that is also part of the approach that we're trying to bring, is to not say here is the one way that feminist Judaism or queer Judaism or anti-racist Judaism is going to look, but to say it's actually up to each of us to create it for ourselves and to wrestle with the text. And that wrestling with the text and tradition, that's where a living Jewishness emerges, is from the wrestling, not from someone else, including us, telling you the right way to do it.
I would say that while you all are more radical than I am politically, I think that I'm probably on the...
for now.
Well, I would call myself sort of left of center, but I mean, I wouldn't call myself sort of a radical politically, but I think I'm a radical Jewishly. So, for example, I would take Purim, I would junk the whole Megillah. I would say, you know what? The origins of Purim is not the story of Purim. It's not the Megillah. The origins of Purim is Nowruz or whatever spring holidays were happening in the Babylonian exile. And I think it's more like Halloween or Christmas that the Jews probably experienced that and they thought it was really beautiful and cool. And they said, we want to have a Jewish version of that. And probably for many, many decades, if not centuries, the Jewish powers that be said, no, that's a non-Jewish holiday and you shouldn't do that. And then eventually somebody wrote a little story that gave a Jewish justification to this festival that we know the Mesopotamians celebrated in very similar ways, right? Including reversals and costuming and all kinds of things that we read about in the Book of Esther. So what I'm saying is that if I find now, hey, the Book of Esther has this violence that I don't like, yes, one option would be to read it in a morning cantillation. Sure, I'm in favor of that. I think that's interesting. But another option would be to say, hey, why don't we just reimagine the holiday of Purim in such a way that it no longer actually requires this story at all? And that is the kind of radicalism that I see the early rabbis as having engaged in, where they inherited all these holidays that if you look up in the Torah what Shavuot is about, for example, it says it's about bringing the first fruits and having sacrifices and giving the priests fruits, and they said, no, it's actually going to now be the reenactment of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, which it never was before. So to me, like the radical imagination is to say, what can Purim be that it never was before? And I guess what I'm asking here is that a different version of Lex's question about the two of you being rabbis and the two of you being Reconstructionists, maybe there's an element here, and this is where I'm wondering, where what this book really is about is saying, hey, this is a book, like you said early on, this is a book that if you are a leftist and you want to find a way into Judaism as it sort of exists today, meaning rabbinic Judaism, then this is the book for you. Then it introduces you in a relatively traditional way to here are the structural elements of these holidays. And now, hopefully, we can find a kind of leftist way to observe the holidays in a relatively traditional way, but a little bit more creatively. And I'm wondering how that lands on you. And I'm wondering if that does describe the project. And I keep asking for examples because I'm curious if the vision of, let's say, an upcoming holiday like Passover is that we more or less do the traditional things like have a Seder, don't eat bread, eat matzah. But yeah, I think that putting an orange on the Seder plate or an olive on the Seder plate is a somewhat radical nod. But I don't think it's actually that radical, right? Because it's saying, hey, we're still going to do everything else, just there's going to be an olive here. And another option is to say, hey, let's have a Passover where we don't do a Seder, and instead where we go and we actively work to liberate other people as we imagine that we wish that somebody would have acted to liberate us. And our observance of Passover going forward is not going to be a Seder, but rather is going to be going to the border and helping people come into the country, right? Or something along those lines. So I'm curious how you think about all that, and how do you imagine the Jewish experience and the Jewish practice of the people that this book is for?
Yeah, thank you for that, Dan. I mean, I think I'm kind of like every time I go to a Passover Seder, as much or little of the actual Exodus story as we engage in, like it still slaps. Like people get, people can still find their way in it. And, I mean, I'll say it here loud and proud, like I'm not a faster. I can't fast. That's not a ritual technology that works for me. I end up like the last time I fasted, it was like 2:00 on Yom Kippur afternoon. And I was sitting on a curb in Cambridge, Massachusetts, crying, saying, I don't want to be Jewish anymore. I am all for like people really checking in with their bodies and being like, this does or does not work for me. And I think there are some holidays that certain people will put down because they don't find meaning in. And, we're writing this in a generation that has been so deeply wounded by white, Christian dominant, capitalist influence assimilation and did not actually get this inheritance. Like that's another part of our audience and readership. And so, like I am all for people putting down what doesn't work for them. And to me, it is a act of healing to say like, this is your inheritance. You get to actually learn it before you put it down. And I just think that in late stage capitalism, we have this idea that we can like come up with new things that are going to be so much better than what came before. This is a tradition that was forged over thousands of years by millions of people. There's, we want to lift up also, we're so blessed to have the work of Dory Midnight and Sol Weiss in this book, the art and poetry of our friends and comrades. Dory does amazing work uncovering women and queer healing within our tradition. We've been given this like beautiful inheritance that has just been crafted by, millions of people whose names we'll never know over centuries. And I believe that through the collective power of like experiment being in the seasons and being in our stories, we are going to grow and change them in really beautiful and powerful ways. I don't think we're going to come up with something brand spanking new that's going to be like so much wiser than what we've inherited. And also to name, I think, you brought in, and this is very much in the book, the way our, Jewish year cycle is earth-based, is an earth-based tradition, is a seasonal tradition that points us towards the seasons, that points us towards growth and change of the earth. That is something that we like so deeply need right now, is to be paying attention there. And so if the only thing our holidays do, Jewish holidays do, would be to help us to like notice that it's about to be 40 degrees in Minnesota in January, and that's not the temperature it was last year on Tu B'Shvat, then like, Dayenu, that's enough. That's like really important work our Jewish holidays are doing. Yeah. And I also, I think I'm kind of like, if the Pesach story inspires people to go like break down prison walls, and we have our Seder as the meal after we've like literally broken people out of prison, or we don't find the need to like actually make a Seder plate because we've done that, like that's beautiful. I would love to be at that meal with you, Dan. I think that's like still very much, I don't know that that's throwing out the Seder. I think that that's embodying it.
I guess like in the spirit of radicalism, in the spirit of what we're talking about here, I want to ask a question. I want to ask it in a really stark way that says, hey, look, when something enormous shifted in Jewish history, meaning the temple was destroyed, the rabbis came in, they said, look, millions of people, or I don't know, at that time, hundreds of thousands of people had developed something over the course of, let's say, 1,000 years, but something has shifted. Something really big has shifted, and that stuff doesn't work anymore. And I guess my question is, don't you believe that something has shifted in that same way in our society, that we want to see, we're seeing, we want to see, we dream of seeing a shift on its axis of the world, that where all kinds of things that our ancestors didn't appreciate, that now we do? Whether that is anti-racism or anti-homophobia or anti-transphobia or anti-misogyny or, all those things, that so much of that is built into the fabric of Judaism because that was the society in which it grew up. So that's why my question is, why aren't we more radical about saying, just as the rabbi said 2,000 years ago, we can't practice Judaism anymore the way we used to? And that's not only a bad thing, that's also an opportunity. Isn't that the same here as well?
Through the act of repairing what has been broken, something different can grow. And Jess used the word healing to talk about the experience of wrestling with the things that have caused so much pain and violence and destruction. I do not think the only radical thing you need to do is walk away from something and throw it away. And to say that if something doesn't serve you, if something is actively harming you, be it all of organized religion, be it the nation state, be it a biological relationship, if it is harming you, you are under no obligation to continue moving it forward. Without structure and baseline for how to keep time, without structure and baseline for how to engage with community that we have established and honed, we would be lost. Judaism is an elastic enough tradition that it can hold all of that meaning. Jess and I are queer femme women who are rabbis in a masculinist tradition, in a Torah that thinks God is a man, or at least in the way that Torah was transmitted and received and written down, people have decided that that means God is a man. We are illegible in a lot of ways to the rabbis who came before us. I have a picture of my ancestor Yerachmiel on the wall, and I think about him looking down and seeing non-Jews who are singing along the blessings over candles, because we make Shabbos together every week, saying, what the hell is going on here? Who are all these gay people? What is this? And then I think about him looking down and seeing Jess officiate at the bris of my son and saying, oh, it's okay, I know about that. I think, in fact, for me, because it works for me, the dissonance of being simultaneously illegible and legible to the people who came before me, that gives me meaning. And I wouldn't want to discard that. I don't think that a definition of radical is throwing it out the window, understands the power and importance and creativity of making tshuva with the parts of our tradition that harm us.
There are parts of each sides of this debate. I'm very excited for all the emails from listeners that are going to be engaged with this back and forth. What I heard Dan saying was not throwing out Purim. It was throwing out a text that we have used in a particular way on Purim and actively asking what would be ways to experience Purim. And Dan, you could speak for yourself. Like, my sense is that I want us to be asking really grand, broad questions about how we mark the flow of time. I do think that asking big questions about, like, is this book right? Could it be another book? Could there be more book? And I don't think you disagree with that. I actually think that what we're saying is aligned on the ways in which the flow of time should be deeply important. It's just to what degree should we be presuming that the liturgical inheritance and the textual inheritance that we have glommed onto those ritual moments is fitting, and when is it not? So I do think there's sort of a connection between what everybody's bringing here.
Yeah, I'll just say that the text at the beginning of the month of Adar is Roske from Inciting Joy. So we are all about, if everyone wants to spend some day in late winter when your seasonal depression is peak, reading Roske, Inciting Joy, or Book of Delights, that is Torah for me. Absolutely. For me, the instruction to intentionally bring in joy in late winter really resonates. There is a range of texts and stories and practices that we bring into the book.
I want to make sure before we fully close that we get to an important piece, which is that your book is the after the colon part. It's a radical's guide to the Jewish year, not the holidays. Well, not just the holidays. And I think that is crucial. And I want to bring a bizarre and deeply corporate capitalist analogy for a second.
Right.
Not because
we'll allow it.
I want to talk about the Super Bowl, which is the most capitalist, the most, So the Super Bowl is a really interesting moment for the people experiencing watching it, because something changes, which is most of the time when people watch live TV, they're watching the program, they're watching the show they're watching, and then when there's commercials, it's a break, and they are not deeply engaged in the commercials. When people watch the Super Bowl, and again, I'm not saying any of this is good for the world. This is true. When people watch the Super Bowl, and I've had my own journey with, do I even watch professional football at all anymore? It's a whole thing. But when people do watch the Super Bowl, people don't even want to go pee during the commercials, because the commercials, there's this sense that they're the most important commercials of the year, and they're funny, and they feature what are they going to do? And I pine for a Judaism where that would be the case, where it's not episodic, where it's not the program is sort of Shabbat and the holidays, and in between is commercials, and we sort of zone out and don't exercise our Jewish muscles that much. I pine for a sense of Jewish life. And I actually have this in my life where Tuesday is a Jewish day. I actually there's the website, istodayajewishholiday.com, or is it a Jewish holiday today ? I wish it said yes every day. Obviously that wouldn't be helpful to anyone. I want a circumstance where we sense that a random Tuesday in the month of, pick one of the months that doesn't have a holiday. I was Cheshvan is often referenced in this way, but Cheshvan does have a holiday, and you talk about Sigd beautifully in your book. But the after Tevet, a Tuesday after Hanukkah has closed in Tevet, how do we experience that as Jewish? Because I think once you do, something shifts. Once the wholeness of life experience feels Jewishly inflected some way, even if it's not that you're praying 3 times a day. I don't do that personally. That's powerful. So I'd love to hear, before we go, how do you approach the moments of the year that are less sexy? How do you help people? Because I think that's a common, I don't know if it's issue. I think a lot of people, they're yeah, I do Passover. I do Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I do Hanukkah maybe. How do I flow? What's the rest?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that the first thing, I just want to give permission for, you and I who don't daven 3 times a day, Lex, and for anyone else who's listening to this, the yearning for practice that you don't have or don't even know about. I don't know, you're in good company. And I want to give permission to the Yom Kippur and Passover Jews to say, if that's all you got, that's a lot. That's beautiful. If what you've got is listening to Judaism Unbound on a regular basis, and that's your Jewish experience, gorgeous. I think that because of the way that Christian secularism has taken over our calendar and our work schedules and our ability to have leisure, accessing our Jewish practice, not even from a place of information, but just from a place of time to do it, can feel like such a barrier to people. And so, yeah, every breath we take is a Jewish breath. And it is very easy to be called by all the other things that pull us away from it. I think a piece of the what happens after the hits that I'm thinking about is like sometimes all we're able to make space for is the hits. And my hope is that we get to have meaningful experiences when we are in Jewish community and a Jewish practice and holiday that can carry us in that time between. And then actually answering your question, very Jewish of me. One of the parts that I love most about what we were learning when we were working on this book over the last 6 years is the valleying, the quiet parts between the holidays and between the seasons that actually link them together. That I'm actually really interested in the swing between Purim to Pesach, in the swing from Tisha B'Av to Simchat Torah, that the motion and the momentum feels actually much more useful and generative even than the like aria moments. But Rabbi Margot Stein talked about Torah trope to me as there's the aria moments, like a shalshela that goes shalshela, and then there's like the regular ones. And I think that we have the aria moments in our calendar that get a lot of attention, but the swing of the seasons is worth noticing. And that's what I'm hoping our book does, the white fire of the black fire of the holidays.
Yeah, and I'll say like about the cycle of the year, part of what we try to offer is some of the invitations of the ways that Jewish holidays and months and seasons can support our political organizing, relationships, family, because each of the holidays and each of the months has like an invitation to internal spiritual work and growth. Part of the invitation of the Jewish year is like we're in the season of tshuva. We're in a season of repair and repentance and self-reflection. We're in a season of collective questioning about liberation. I know what has felt more and more true to me over the years as I'm like in more and more community with people who are like living in Jewish time and also trying to bring together their political commitments to into the Jewish year is actually getting a sense of like, you know, when I'm lakeside in a lul with a friend, like what we're talking about is, you know, like, is preparing for the holidays, like whether or not it's like, that like, this is what is swirling in community and in relationships. And I think that like, that's part of, so like whether or not people actually go to synagogue or to services on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that they feel a sense of communal connection to this is a time of introspection and can be like mutually supporting each other in that. Tishrei, the first month of the year, I think is the longest chapter. Tishrei and Nisan, very long. And it felt very important to say like, we want to support people to know more what's going on in synagogue because it's so confusing. And then also we want to say, like, if you spend these days of the fall, like laying by a river with a friend, you know, reflecting on your year, this and this is Judaism, this and this is Jewishness. That's all here for us.
I just feel called to say, like, in the past few months, given our world right now, and given the fact that I am a person ordained as a rabbi, a ton of people, I can't overstate how many, a ton of people are finding me and saying, hey, can we have coffee and talk? There are many different reasons why we're having coffee and talking. Like, as I say this, I have 15 coffees in the month we're recording. A secret, we're recording in January. I know this is coming out in a while. The biggest, most recurring theme in those conversations is people who desperately, deeply want to be in sincere, deep Jewish community in lived ways through holidays, through Shabbat, through whatever, and aren't finding it possible in the organizations they know about, which is generally the main synagogues in the area that I live in, Providence, and like the Jewish Federation here, etc. I believe, I mean, the four of us, we've got Chicago, Providence, Baltimore, and Minneapolis. I mean, that's like 4 interesting cross sections. I believe we are talking about thousands upon thousands, potentially tens of thousands of people who specifically feel deeply dissatisfied to the point that it's something they act, not just like, oh yeah, like if there were a cool Jewish thing, I might do it, like something they think about daily. They want to have a richer, deeper, more spiritual Jewish life. And the organizations in their area do often to politics, but not even just political lack of alignment. Sometimes it's just they're boring. Like sometimes, but like there's a deep sense that what we have is not doing it. And the problem is we haven't all had a million coffee dates and one-on-ones and built up our shared projects together so that we're Judaism now. But I actually think that we are a massive group. And so my question as we close is, I do in fact think that the pathway towards creating the world where those people connect to each other, meet each other, build things together, and contribute to the betterment of our world together, I think that that pathway starts with the flow of time. I think it starts with holidays. I think that that's what people in that zone tend to be looking to spark. I'd love to have a Purim event to go to that didn't feel icky and violent. I'd love to have a Passover that feels aligned with my progressive values. I'd love to have, pick your holiday. This is crucial. And so as we close, again, I'm wondering, are there particular moments of the year that might be particularly well suited for that? Because I think we're at a moment of unbelievably massive change in Jewish life in some ways that make me excited. Like, I actually think there are more of these people looking for something that I want to exist than there were a few months ago. So that's good. But how do we channel that, and what are the moments of the flow of time that we might be best positioned to do so?
So we're in a existential crisis in Judaism. And I'm so grateful that people get to have coffee with you, Lex, because all Jewish people are suffering. Judaism is being weaponized. And so we are in a moment of existential crisis in Judaism that maybe is akin to where Dan was taking us with the destruction of the temple and needing to abandon all the practices of before. It makes sense that we are stretching out and trying to find each other. This is a crisis of moral and ethical proportion that we have seen on the horizon, but could never have imagined at the same time. And thank God it has been growing before, right? It is not just because of the violence in Palestine that is happening now that the Jewish left is blossoming. Thank God. But it's a piece of it. And we have to name some of the heat behind it. And like all the more so, like leftist progressive Judaism is life-saving, necessary, a thing that deserves to flourish and that we deserve to find each other for. I think we find each other on Pesach. Passover is the most widely celebrated Jewish holiday. It's not Hanukkah. It's the idea that, I should be sitting around a table telling a story of freedom. All the more so for Jews who are looking for not boring, welcoming holidays where their loved ones who aren't Jewish can come, where they can tell a story of freedom, where they can find a story that represents their values. I think it's Passover. I think that's the moment that we reach each other because we're already trying to do that. And we're already panicking about a rodent dragging a sandwich into our house, either literally or emotionally.
I agree with you that we're in a huge turning of Jewish life. And for me, I do think that it has so much to do with the way post-Holocaust Jewish life moved towards nationalism as a safety strategy. We're in this time where so much is cracking and falling apart. And that's both what's happening in Israel-Palestine and also like the economic system we're in that does not meet very many people's on the planet's needs. And I think that the Jewish year and the Jewish holidays have portals to both past and future and to each other, like just ways to connect with each other. And so I think like in the month of Av, we have the beauty of both Tisha B'Av and Tu B'Av, this holiday of like mourning of the destruction of the temple, and then also celebrating love and connection. And we both love both, but also like I'm a Tisha B'Av gal. Ariana's a hero of Tu B'Av. And, you know, one of the hard questions for me was like, as an anti-Zionist, like, how do I mark Tisha B'Av? It's about the destruction of the temple. And I'm not praying for a third temple. And part of what like was uncovered for me in the writing of this book was that like the invitation is that people kind of like both dive into Pesach and stories of liberation, and then also dive into this moment of saying like, how do we relate to a tradition that has a centralized place of worship that got destroyed? And like, what do we think about that? Like, how does that, bring into our current time? So, and then like a week later on Tu B'Av, get to like flirt and dance and listen to tuba music.
Shouts to Ariana for Tu B'Av, the pun where you brought how many tubas?
I think it was a minion.
At least 10 tubas for the pun celebration of Tu B'Av, which is spectacular.
Yeah.
We're friends on that front. For Tu B'Shvat, for a number of years, my wife and I have poured different wines into test tubes so that we have test Tu B'Shvat.
Oh,
I love it
cute.
so much.
And this year we made a playlist using the app Tubi, the like free streaming app. We found all sorts of random Jewish films and TV shows on Tubi for Tu B'Shvat. So find the puns and manifest them into holidays.
Yeah. And just to really say, like, whatever, the real answer of like what holiday to start with is like whichever one you feel called to, like that's the real answer. And what we hope this book does is like give invitations where people find more ways into all of them and finds the medicine that they need. I like often talk about Aurora Levins-Morales' book, Medicine Stories, was one of the main reasons I went to rabbinical school. She talks about Historianus Curandera and finding the like untold stories that are medicine in our time. And I believe all of our holidays have medicine for this time. And so and you can only know what is the medicine for you specifically through sitting with the holiday. And so that's the invitation, is to like, be really in touch with like what is happening for each of us, and then be in the Jewish year and find the medicine and spread it around.
Thank you both so much for joining us. This has been such a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dan, thank you for the machloket. Thanks for the grist for us to get to push into.
We got to make a little heat.
We definitely love when our episodes have a little bit of a kick, a little bit of spice, a little bit of that heat. So thanks to Ariana and Jessica. Thanks to all of you out there for listening and engaging. We would love to hear from you about the different machlokets debates that came up today. And first, here's how you get the book. It's not quite released just yet as we release this, but it will be soon. You can head to 4times, such as thesebook.com. That's just the name of this book, followed by the word book.com. Or you can head to the show notes for this episode on our website, where we have a big old link to click where you can pre-order the book. If you're listening to this after the book has been released in mid-March, then you'll be able to just purchase the book and have it sent to you. So in either case, we hope that you will check it out. It's a fantastic read. Also, if you want to be in touch with us with any questions, ideas, visions, comments about the Jewish present and future, all of that is super welcome. You can be in touch via our Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook handles. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. You can email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. And of course, you can check out show notes for this episode, all sorts of good resources, etc. at judaismunbound.com, our website. Last but not least, we are always really, really grateful, especially on this, the 8th anniversary of our podcast's initial launch, to receive your financial support. It is absolutely unreal. It is so beyond what I ever and what we ever could have envisioned, that we would be in a place where this podcast is still going strong nearly a decade after its initial launch. So thanks to all of you, even if you've listened just to this episode, but also if you've listened to hundreds of them, for making that a reality. We are really hoping to keep this work going strong into the future and have it channeled towards the creation of new, vibrant, justice-driven Jewish futures. So if you want to be part of that, please head to judaismunbound.com/donate, and you can make either a monthly recurring gift so that this giving of yours continues as a monthly practice, or you can send us a one-time donation. Either of those, judaismunbound.com/donate. So thanks to each of you for hopefully taking that moment and sending us a little bit of support as we continue our strides into the next 8 years. But with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.